Thank you for joining. Each time I interviewed a world expert in their field, authors and influencers who shape our cultures. Today, it's a great pleasure to have Rhoda Bangerter, who is a specialist in split family assignments and frequent business travel and its impact on family life. She helps parents manage the stress and disconnect from living this life so that they can enjoy the growth and intention this lifestyle can bring. She's the author of the book, Holding the Fort Abroad, and the founder of A Multicultural Life. Welcome, Rhoda. Tell me more about yourself, Rhoda, that I haven't already mentioned here.
Well, thank you so much, Lydia, for having me. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. One thing that isn't in there is that I'm mixed heritage. It took me a while to realize the impact of growing up sort of with mixed cultures in my DNA.
Yes. She
and
shared heritage.
Yeah, so my mum is from the Middle East, and then she married my dad, who was British. And then I grew up in France, and now I'm married to a Swiss.
Oh, so, wow. That's a lot of multicultural richness that your children actually have, and yourself. I mean, there's a lot of richness in that.
Yeah. Yes. A lot of richness in how things are done differently. But then you have to kind of make sense of it sometimes when you're doing things that are opposite, if you see what I mean.
I totally understand, especially where there is some conflicts within cultures.
Yeah, exactly. And that took me a lot to find out. And then I read A Culture Map by Erin Meyer.
It's wonderful.
And wow. And then I started looking into the different cultures that made me, but also what makes culture, how anthropologists look at culture and how it's been explained, and it made a lot of sense. And I thought, wow, it can be decoded. It's not just this sort of gray area that I'm not sure about. I can understand. There are ways of understanding it that can then help me in my relationship, and also not even with my relationships, but with me as myself, and trying to figure out who I was. And then once I knew that, then that helped me with the relationship with others.
It sounds like you've done a lot of deep work within yourself, Rhoda. And
I have,
with your superb book, like I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. You share so much of, your life and the challenges. So I want to ask you, what inspired you to write Holding the Fort Abroad?
Well, it was 2019, and my husband was with the Foreign Service, the Swiss Foreign Service. He still is, and he was offered a job in Kabul. And we were in Switzerland at the time with our children, and we were thinking about whether to do that or not, whether he would go for 2 years on his own to Afghanistan, and I would stay with the boys in Switzerland. And by that time, I'd retrained as a coach, and I started asking questions. I was like, is this crazy? We had always said that we would never do it. And we'd been married 10 years by then. We were like, no way. Why would we want to live separately when we're a couple and we love each other?
Yes.
But the more I started digging, the more I started realizing that people do it. People choose it for multiple reasons. Families were doing it within, I think, 2-3 months. We found couples just popped out of nowhere. People that we knew, kind of acquaintances, they said, oh yeah, we do that. I'm like, really? Because it just doesn't come up in conversation. So I started digging, and then I also realized that he might have, all through our marriage up to that point, my husband had done a lot of frequent business travel because he'd been a humanitarian before that. And absences for work are also very common in families.
Yes.
So it's slightly different when one of us actually moves into another country, but there are similarities of this parental absence and being a long distance couple. And then I thought, well, I'm interviewing people, I'm doing research. Let's write it as I'm living it.
Oh, wow.
So it's sort of hot off the press in the sense as I'm writing that book as I am living it real time.
Gee, that would have been a real, I suppose, way for you to process your experiences and to actually make sense of the decisions you both made. And can you just share with me more? Was that challenging as you're writing it? Was he actually at home with you? Was that by that time he was already in Kabul?
By that time, he was already in Kabul. So really what I was finding as I was interviewing people who
Yes.
had lived it, and some people had lived it as the child, and they were telling me now as adults, I was finding that it resonated so much with my own life and the experiences we were going through. I was like, there are similarities, there are threads through this type of life. And I think what I find most when I'm speaking to people who are living it now or who are wondering about making the choice is that a lot of people think, oh, I'm struggling with this or this or that, and something in me must be broken. And it's not. There are common challenges to this lifestyle, but I've also interviewed families that make it work. And there are also common ways of making it work. And so, yes, it was hugely challenging. I mean, I compare it to walking on a tightrope. You know,
Yeah.
it really requires intentionality
Yes.
and putting things in place because it could wreck you,
Oh,
really.
I did definitely, because writing a book in itself is such a hard challenge.
Right.
You did that
Right.
solo parenting, but it sounds like through the interviews you were quite empowered by what you were finding out from
Yes.
others, that it is possible to live this kind of a life and that you develop strategies. I mean, you're a living proof that your family has made this work. So
Yeah.
I
Yes.
mean, what I loved about the book was you outlined, that living this kind of life, you do lose your support networks, your identity, your independence, and the increased stress as an accompany partner when your partner,
Mm.
leaves for work and you're left with the kids. And the image you painted for me in the earlier chapters of you in Manhattan, New York City, with pramming the two boys, your two children, and navigating this whole new city while he's already gone for another work assignment. I just thought, wow. I mean, that's a lot to juggle as a young mother.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And that's why I called it Holding the Fort Abroad, because at the time I'd also joined Families in Global Transition, which is for people who are globally mobile for work and
Yes.
the families that accompany them. But also I found that it was very prevalent that families accompany and then the person ends up in another country anyway, or is traveling. It's one of the top stresses for an accompanying spouse. And so you have that extra layer of you've moved to another country, you've lost your social network, you're struggling potentially with identity, and on top of that you have frequent business travel or a partner who's gone. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is. It does sound like it. And I'd never actually thought of the real intricacies of that, like you going to the bank and realizing they won't give you money because your husband's the only holder and here you are stuck and he's in a different place, not contactable. I mean, in terms of able to come over to the bank and rescue you. So they're just a lot of different examples which I think gave me a real glimpse into the lives of people like yourself and create a lot of empathy. I mean, I've walked with people who struggle with partners abroad as well in counseling, but I think your book brings this into a very relatable and accessible way and packed with the resources. Could I ask you, how long did
Thank
it
you.
take you to write the book?
Just over a year. Yeah, just over a year. I got a writing coach, and I must say that I got a writing coach, and it was like a fire in my belly. I just had to get it out, what I was learning as I was going along. And it's resonated with a lot of people. Some people have said, like, even in their 70s and 80s, some people have said, I've read your book and it's brought me closure to what I've lived
Wonderful.
as a person living in another country. And then my husband, it's still 80% women who are at home, and maybe 20% men who are at home. So a lot of women have told me, like, it's brought closure to me, as my husband was, so taken with work, and it's given me vocabulary about what I was experiencing, of feeling, that I'm holding the fort, that I'm kind of, managing all the home front. And he's starting, and it doesn't mean that they don't care. Some people say, like, why not be home if you're not going to take care of the kids and be with your wife? It doesn't mean that. A lot of families choose this for many reasons, because the wife doesn't want to move, or the partner doesn't want to move, because the kids have special needs, because of education, because you want to be closer to an older parent, because of safety in a country. There's a lot of reasons, because of vocation. My husband really felt called to use his skills and serve in Afghanistan. So it's not crazy to live this life.
Yes, and it sounds like it's a lot more common now with the globalization, with the mobility of multinational companies. So I think you allowed, people to put words to their experiences when you wrote the book. So it really spoke to so many people. And with what you shared in the book, with the different families, the different situations, cultures, I just want to know, how do the cultural and intercultural dynamics play a role in the experiences of solo parenting abroad?
Yes. Just before I answer your question, I am slightly moving away from the term solo parenting, because, and on my website, I've changed the page to say it's not solo parenting, because really I want to encourage people to parent together. So it does feel like single parenting or solo parenting. Somebody said to me, like, oh, you're a single parent. I'm like, well, actually, I'm not, because there is another parent in the picture. And so the point is to be creative about how that other parent can be involved. But cultures, I find that fascinating, because, and it's an area that I want to really dig into more, because there's a lot written about multicultural teams in companies working in various places, and who work remotely, and looking at how culture can then, create potential for miscommunications or things. So I'm looking at how can that happen, for example, between a couple or within a family, because for me, a family where there are multiple cultures, and that could be just from different family backgrounds.
That's right.
And being raised in different families. So, for example, it's asking for help.
Yes.
Looking at how do you ask for help in your culture? Were you raised to ask for help or not ask for help? That could be very different from one person to the next. Talking about emotions, right? Some people just don't talk about them, others will. And as in a couple, as a cross-cultural couple, you're already dealing with these differences. And then when you put distance in there, that doesn't change. These things will come to the forefront as well in your communication. But then there's things like use of pauses in a call. There's asking questions. There's what was the other one I was going to mention? There's all sorts of ways that it can come up in a conversation. All the expectations that you have, the expectations of roles that you have of the other person. So I think that distance doesn't take away that need to work on cross-cultural communication if you're in a cross-cultural couple.
That's so true. And I just love your emphasis that it's both the partners working together. And that's what, you really focused on, is creating that security and safety for the family culture as you navigate all the other multiple cultures and new cultures that you're experiencing. So that's a wonderful emphasis that you've made, that it's not you're moving away from solo parenting because you're realizing that it's the couple together and the family together, which I love. And I just
Yes.
want to ask you, Rhoda, what are the practical, recommendations that you made in the book that you want to share with the audience about nurturing those relationships in the family when, either mum or dad is away on a work assignment?
Well, since the book, I've developed a framework, a 5-pillar framework, that if these 5 pillars are solid, then this lifestyle is sustainable. And the first one is personal well-being and development for the person who's away, but also for the person who's with the children in that scenario, right? Because there are also other scenarios when each parent has a child or more than one child.
Yes.
But I think obviously this lifestyle is going to be super stressful. There are a lot of uncertainties. So I always say, like, self-care, double it, triple it, quadruple it.
Yes.
And it's hard to do when you're going like 100 kilometers an hour and you've got a lot of responsibilities. And so I'm trying to curate resources of how do you de-stress when you don't have time. So there's a lot of resources on my podcast about that. The second pillar is the couple.
Yes.
How do you stay a strong couple? Because when you're living separately, it's even easier to kind of go different ways and become strangers. So working on your friendships, the Gottman books are amazing.
That's true.
Things like that, leaning towards each other. So it's the strong couple. The third one is parenting together, and then each parent's individual relationships with children. And I spend a lot of time sort of encouraging the parent with the children to think up creative ideas of how to include the parent who's away. There might be big time differences.
Yes.
But even like, so we had 2 clocks when we were at home. We had one the Kabul time and one the Bern time. And I remember my son looking up at the clocks and saying, "Oh, Papa's having lunch." So even that, we're not adding to the to-do list,
Yes.
but we're creating a home where both parents exist. And it's in the narrative as well of how we speak. The fourth one is managing transitions. So depending on how long the parent has been gone, the transition time can be short to come back into the family life. So looking at continuity, trying to find activities or themes or something that's going to create continuity for when they're gone and when they're coming back. So things like family meetings, or the example I always give is this dad I met who was writing a book with his 14-year-old. And so they would do it when he was home and they would do it when he was gone. That created continuity. Also super important is to keep the other parent in the loop of what's going on. Even if it might keep changing, it's good if they can know. And that doesn't mean calling every day. That could mean, having an email bullet list. That can mean having a family newsletter. That could mean a lot of different things. But I find from the people I've spoken to that the parent who's away, if they're aware of what's going on, it's incredibly helpful for them when they come home.
Beautiful.
And then the fifth one, unfortunately, is emergencies, is being prepared for emergencies. So it's in your individual well-being and development specifically for the parent who's home, the strong couple, the relationship with the children, transition times, and the last one is emergencies. you know, unfortunately, emergencies will happen. And when emergencies happen and you're not on the same country,
Yes, that's
it gets tricky. So
correct.
being able to prepare for that, but also kind of know that that's going to happen, which brings you back to the loop that you really have to be careful about how much margin you have in your life.
Yes, no, I mean, the pillars are just so clear and such a wonderful contribution to enable strength in the family. So thank you for sharing that. Rhoda, I want to ask you, so how can people get a copy of your book? Do they go on A Multicultural Life, the website? How can they actually get help from you? Particularly, I know, a number of families who are struggling with, mum or dad in split locations. So how can they actually get help from you or access the book?
So the book is on all the big platforms, Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books. So they can get it there. I think the most regular they can get is to sign on to my newsletter, rhodabangerter.com/keep in touch.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll hear about, because I'm working on a resource center right now, so then they'll hear about when that comes out, and they'll have all my resources with the different pillars. And I also do one-on-ones accompaniment. And if anybody's considering this life, then I can also talk to them about what to kind of watch out for and what to think about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rhoda. It's a real pleasure to hear about not only your book, but your life and what you're actually doing in terms of helping other families with the experiences that you've gone through. It's a real pleasure to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks again.